Yep. Hi, everybody. I hope you can see me now, hear me now. There's a few dramas setting this up, and I'm just waiting for my mate Vinny at the other end to give me a thumbs up that everything's looking okay. But as yet, that's not happening. How are we going, Vinny? Yeah, few glitches today. Just simple. No good.
It's not showing you live yet.
No. Shows here I'm live for 44 seconds on my channel, on my YouTube channel. But something not coming out.
Just give me 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Just check on YouTube.
Stay with us. I'm just going to check that this is working okay. I don't think it is, Vinny, because it's saying I've only got one view here, and even I can get more than one view, I think.
Oh, you know what?
What?
You're unlisted. That's
Ah,
right.
ah, okay. So edit. All right, I'll just go straight into it then, shall I? Okay, that's all right. Don't worry.
Okay, no problems.
Public.
That will be sorted.
It'll go straight live now when I press public, right? I don't need to do an intro or anything, correct?
Right. Perfect.
Hello, everybody. Apologies for all these dramas. You probably haven't been seeing anything that's been going on, but we've had a few dramas, and thanks to my technical team, we've got it all sorted out now. All to do with, I don't know what it's to do with, really. I mean, I've got about 5 YouTube channels. For some reason, it was linked into the wrong YouTube channel. Then the date and time seemed to be wrong. Then we couldn't get the chat box to work. And now it's all perfect. Yeah, right. Anyway, welcome to the live stream. It's it's good to be with you. Obviously it's a slightly different time to normal, and normally we go out in the morning, have been going out in the morning, and I'm still going to do that. I'm going to start doing some evening ones as well. Maybe not quite as long as I did them, but do more of them. Maybe not for quite as long as we did. That's the general plan going forward. It's all good intentions. Whether we actually pull that off is another matter, of course. But I've still got one more hurdle to go through, which is to make sure that the chat box thing is working and I can see what you guys want to talk about. And to do that, I'm going to go to the first one, and then I'm going to see if I can bring the chat box up on, just so I can see what we're doing. You know, it sounds a bit complicated, but it's not that yeah, there we go. So the first one is from Sarosh Soman, who's one of our regulars. Hi, Sarosh. Thanks so much for everybody. Thank you. If you haven't walked away and you're still there, thank you for bearing with me. It's not always easy, is it? But then again, as I keep saying, I remember Sky and the BBC and ABC and Speed TV. All of us, over the years, many errors, and here we are, finally there. Hi, Peter. I thought Leclerc was fantastic in the race. It felt to me that all he was focused on was driving the race without any emotions and just trusting his talent. Defending Max in the wet was fantastic. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And, you know, I've kind of gone along with the whole bandwagon of that he does make too many mistakes. And, of course, he has made a lot of mistakes, sometimes in crucial moments of a race. But most of them, majority of them, are when it doesn't really matter. That's not always the case. Hasn't even been the case this year. We've seen some Charles brainstorms, but yeah, you know, that was one of his best drives, and I agree with you 100%. I mean, as it turned out, to have good top speed and to be able to but run the car well through sector 2 was the way to drive that Grand Prix with the weather conditions we had. So it was always going to be difficult for Max. He was sort of, I don't know, he was 10 clicks down on the straight. He never even got within DRS zone range once. But Charles had plenty of opportunity, if that's the right word, to make lots of mistakes in sector 2 because it wasn't bone dry for quite a long time. And he didn't make any, really, did he? We saw one lock-up, I think, into the chicane, was it? Yeah, I think so. And that was about it. Head down, just a superb drive. As we know Charles can do, he's that good. And it just brings me back to the original point I made, which was that Ferrari last year had a great driver pairing. And Charles was getting better, Carlos was getting better. Their problem was not drivers. Their problem, as I've been saying all along, was the car. And it still is the car if you want to look at where they are relative to McLaren. But John Alcon, above, I guess, above Freddie Vasseur, although Freddie should never agree to a team principal contract unless he had control over the driver selection, insisted, I guess, on having Lewis. And Lewis is a great guy, great driver, great champion, and nobody's ever going to say no to Lewis Hamilton, except that you had to say the priority is not drivers at the moment. The priority is the car. And, Charles just does what he does. It was just a shame it was really rewarded with third place in a way. But yeah, to beat Max, Max was right there often in Sector 2. Great job. And, he was superb. So thanks for that. I think you got another question there, Sarosh. Hi, Peter. I enjoyed the race when it's wet since there's no DRS, and they should have started the race when it was fully wet. Felt a bit sad for Max since he has set his car anticipating this condition. Yeah, I did too. And I know you got another question coming up. Sad is the wrong word, but is the right word, but I think it was just one thing led to another. I think Red Bull after Silverstone, when the car was quite patently useless, as it was the last year, I think as well, wasn't it? When it was sticky and wet, and then he picked up a lot of pace later on. They were just panicked into thinking we don't want to be in that situation again. We got to give Max a car that's got grip in Sector 2, and so they cranked on the wing. And I've just said to Cameron on Monday when we chatted, and this is not in any way to criticise the thinking of we're learning from Silverstone, we don't want to make a mistake. I'm not talking about that at all. A completely different subject is how wet does it have to be before the FIA and the race director says we're not going to race. And we never got to that point at Silverstone. That was never, ever going to be an issue. It was always going to be a damp track, rolling start, all the rest of it that we had. Spa, completely different. A very different circuit with a lot more opportunity for things to go wrong in the wet for a start. B, lots of trees, lots of canyons that keep the spray and the mist above the cars, making visibility much worse than it would ever be at Silverstone. And C, a poor record at Spa for injuries and accidents, particularly in poor weather. And D, the changeable weather as well, and how sudden rainfall can appear over the Ardennes forest. And I made the point to Cameron that if, of all the team principals in the pit lane, the one that you would think would be most in tune with the way the FIA and the race director were going to think would be Laurent Mekies, because he's worked for the FIA quite recently for at least 2 years on the safety side. So he should be completely in sync with the way they were thinking and the way it could go. And I find it strange. I suppose I'm not going to say extraordinary because that's a bit over the top, but I find it strange that when Red Bull, obviously on Saturday night, were thinking, right, this is or whatever it was before qualifying, we're going to be, we don't want to go where we went at Silverstone. We're going to run this much wing, and one of the engineers for sure would have said, well, if we run that much wing, you realise how slow he's going to be on the straight. Yeah, but anyway, we need to give him the grip in Sector 2. At that moment, Laurent Mekies really should have been saying, well, there's one other factor here. If it's going to be as wet as you guys think it's going to be, to the point where we're running that much wing, they probably won't even race anyway. They'll probably stop the race. So don't be too over the top with your wing settings. But I guess he was either overruled or that conversation never happened. And if that conversation never happened, then I would be astonished, because it should have. There's a guy with that pedigree, should be able to have some idea of where they're going to go in those sorts of conditions. And obviously nobody knew exactly how wet it was going to be, but certainly on my phone there was a big storm cloud with lightning and lots of rain coming down from about midnight Saturday night, certainly 3 o'clock local time Sunday morning. So I'm amazed that Red Bull did put that much wing on the car and didn't, through the Mekies connection with the FIA, didn't anticipate in any way that the race would be held up for 1 hour 20 minutes or whatever it was, to the point where they didn't even have a standing start, which was very annoying. I thought they'd got over that, and okay, if it's now dry enough to be able to race, at least we're going to have a standing start for the fans. And they didn't even do that. I think they wanted to just get the track as dry as possible behind that, lumbering Vantage safety car. But I don't know. Can they not still do that and then pull up and do a standing start? Or has it got to be a rolling start if they're doing that? I don't know. If they're doing more than one pace lap. I don't know the regs there. I should do, I suppose. Sarosh Soman says, Peter, what are Leclerc's options if the Ferrari doesn't deliver next year, in your opinion? He's been stuck with the third best team for far too long. I think he deserves to be in a championship team. Well, yeah. I mean, I put my hand up. I've been a Leclerc fan for a long time, going back to GP, well, certainly GP2, F2. I don't know if it was F2. I guess it was. And I went all the way to Jerez to watch him clinch his championship and get the T-shirt signed, the Prema T-shirt. You know, I've massively been into Leclerc for a long time. And, you know, I think he's in a similar situation to all the drivers, all the top drivers. Nobody knows how the 26 cars are going to be. It's a completely new power unit. And to some extent, it's a new car. Obviously, there'll be a little bit of overlap, but we've got the active aero and all that stuff. And not as much ground effect. So it could be that Ferrari actually have a brilliant car next year and Leclerc could win the championship. Equally, it could be a horrendous car. Ferrari got no idea how to do the power unit with 50% electrification and the chassis is useless with no downforce. It could be that, but nobody knows. And so there's no point in even thinking beyond mid-26 if you're a guy as good as Charles or Max, because you've got to see where everybody is. And then there'll be a scramble. If one team has a massive advantage over everybody else, and it could be Aston Martin, of course, with Adrian Newey's new car, with Fernando Alonso, I guess, at the wheel, then there'll be a scramble around that. And that'll be a difficult one, won't it? Because if Fernando is going incredibly well and going to win a championship, winning races, there's no way he's going to leave for 27 anyway. So there'll be no room for a Max or a Charles there. So then, you know, you're just looking into the future and thinking, let's wait and see. That's all you can do. I mean, I would imagine Mercedes are going to have a really good power unit, but then again, they've got a pretty good one now, and they're getting blown away by McLaren, one of their customers. I would imagine Ferrari will be okay with the power unit, probably not as good as Mercedes out of the box, I would imagine. I'm just guessing. And I guess Honda will do a really good job with Adrian, who knows all the Honda people really well. And you got Andy Cowell there as well at Aston Martin, and he was the man behind the whole Mercedes powertrain thing anyway, you know, in England. So they're going to have a great engine for sure. And we'll see. All you can say is let's wait and see how it goes. Lou Sequoia, hi Peter. It's only me thinking that it's not right for reporters to invade a driver with questions while he's going to his race car when he should keep his concentration to himself. Thank you. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, I used to do that grid walk live for Speed TV, and I wasn't afraid to go up to a Bernie or a Ron Dennis or any of that lot. But if it was a driver, I always checked with them beforehand, well beforehand, like an hour before the race, if it would be okay to come up and just do a couple of things. And they would often say, "No, not this race," or "Yeah, but if I change my mind at the last minute, don't be surprised." But I always cleared it with them, and I think that's important to do. I think they probably still do that today. Maybe they don't. I don't know. But you know, my style of questioning is actually to try to have a conversation and to see what they're thinking about at that moment, rather than to go with pre-rehearsed questions. And even if they answer the first question, you still have to ask the second question because the box tells you to do it, the tick box, even though they've just given the answer, which what seems to happen 90% of the time with the interviewers today. But, you know, I'd go up to Fernando, and I know Fernando always loves talking about the first corner, so I always used to say to him, "Yeah, so left or right, outside, inside, Fernando, what do you reckon? Is he going to make a good start?" And he used to love those sorts of conversations, and he could do that. But I never got Kimi to talk to me on the grid, ever. To the point where I think it actually cost him a result once. I'm pleased to say. I'm talking about Kimi Räikkönen now. I think it was 07 Fuji in the wet, and it was one of the first times that the FIA said everybody must start on, I guess it was intermediates, or maybe it was wets. I can't remember which it was. It was one or the other. And this came through. I heard it on my headset, and we were getting it through race control. And I was on the grid with all my stuff, and I went round to the Ferrari, Kimi's thing, and I was about to say to anybody that I could talk to, whether it would be his engineer or Kimi, what do you think about this? Because you're on intermediates and you got to start on wets now, or vice versa. Because I can't remember which one it was. But they just shooed me away, and Kimi shooed me away. And he started on the wrong tyres and got a penalty. So I was pleased about that. We had a laugh about it later on. But yeah, DC was always very good to talk to. David Coulthard, he was always very articulate. Mika Hakkinen, Mika always stayed in the car anyway. Jacques Villeneuve always used to stay in the car. Never got out at all. And that led me, once I started doing a lot of this YouTube stuff, that led me to say, I think it's completely wrong that these drivers are allowed to just sit in the car and do nothing when the national anthem of the country is being played and nobody pays any attention to it. Everybody should take off their caps and stand to attention. And now everybody takes it for granted. Oh yeah, it's the formal thing at the start. They all walk to the front and they play the anthem and they all stand to attention, or sort of. But they didn't for a long time. And I used to push Bernie really hard to do that. And he said, nah, load of rubbish, get away. And so, I'm pleased to see that does happen. AB says, only respect for you, Peter. It was mighty impressive from Leclerc to keep Max behind for 44 laps. I'm pretty sure any other driver on the grid, in place of him and Max overtaking that Ferrari. Yeah, I think, it was a great drive. But I'm not surprised. I mean, Charles is Charles. He's really good. And I suspect Max knew that after about 3 laps, when he knew even in the wet he wasn't going to be able to get within they didn't have DRS, but he wasn't even able to get in towing range, that it was all over unless there was some glitch. And he wasn't even near enough. He was near enough to put pressure on Charles, but yeah, Charles was just in a zone, drove really well. I think Max drove as well as he could drive in that car, but it must have been unbelievably frustrating for him. And the interesting thing is, actually, looking at it back 2 days, benefit of 2 days hindsight, is how Max's front tyres went off in the last 3 laps with a better handling, better gripped car through sector 2. And yet Charles his tyres weren't great, but they didn't go off any more than Max's. And you would have thought the one possibility for Max would be if Charles' tyres went away and he did lose a lot of grip for sector 2, but that never happened. A lot of things didn't happen with the tyres that they expected, actually, particularly the hard versus the medium with Lando. I mean, looking back at that choice for hard tyres, as I said with Cameron, it's very, very easy to say mistakes from Lando. To me, really, the mistake was offering him the hard tyre, because the minute they did that, I think Lando felt, I've got a different setup to Oscar now and I can drive a different race, and if he has a problem with the mediums, which for sure he will, I can win this race. And I think when you've got 2 drivers who are fighting closely with one another and one of them goes on a different strategy with different tyres, there's a psychological thing that comes in there as well. And from Oscar's point of view, that was great news for him, because he knew then that all he had to do was keep the gap around 5-6 seconds, and it was more than that most of the time, and then just nurse the tyres to the finish. He won the race, no problem at all. And that's exactly what happened. And then he put pressure on Lando to have to go right on the edge of the hard tyre. And of course the problem was that the hard tyre in Spa was much harder relative to the medium than it normally is at all the other races. It was the hardest. There was the biggest gap between hard and medium for at least 2 years, I think, in Formula One, reading the Pirelli thing. And for that hard tyre to work, even on a McLaren, it had to be, the sun had to be shining. And when the clouds came over again, about 15 minutes, 20 minutes before the end of the race, the hard tyre lost it. And that's where Lando lost any chance of winning. And obviously mistakes came into it as well. So I think, I don't know, did McLaren make a mistake in offering that to Lando, even thinking that way? Or were they thinking, we've got 2 race-winning cars here, let's go for the split options because we don't know how it's going to go. As a team, that's a great thing to do. Or did they think it's going to be good for Lando's morale to be on different tyres to Oscar, because if he's on the same tyres, he's going to get down if he gets blown away. And let's give him a lift by giving him the hard tyre opportunity. It could have been any of those. It probably was a combination of all of them. Bit over the top complication, really, wasn't it? AB again. It's high time Leclerc stops being a good boy at Ferrari and takes a few risks and maybe thinks about Red Bull or Aston with Newey. Oscar already matched his win numbers. He needs to get out of his comfort zone. Well, I don't think he's there because he just wants to be in a comfort zone. I mean, if you look at it, I mean, what offers has he turned down? What opportunities have there been in the last 3 years that he could have taken and hasn't? He's always been on relatively long contracts, Ferrari contracts, when other opportunities have emerged. Of course he sits there thinking, yeah, I've been around longer, I'm a better driver than Oscar Piastri, whatever he thinks. He doesn't think that way, but he thinks he's as good as anybody, if not better than anybody in the world. Otherwise he wouldn't be Charles Leclerc. He wouldn't be a racing driver. So he thinks, yeah, if Ferrari continue like this, I've got to get to a better team. But like I said, I think he'll see what happens in 26, and then he'll be hot property for 27. If Ferrari have a bad car in 26, believe me, he will get some offers in 27. Whether he'll ever find his way to Aston Martin, I don't know, because I think at the moment Adrian is pretty locked into wanting to keep Fernando, which is great for Fernando, and I think, you know, that'll probably go on for 2 years now. I can't see Fernando not doing unbelievably well in a Adrian Newey Aston Martin next year, unless Adrian completely drops the ball. And you know, I suppose he's capable of that. He's not 34 years old anymore, but that doesn't mean anything, does it? He's even more experienced than ever. And if that's, you know, Fernando wins a championship next year for Aston Martin, why wouldn't he race in 27 for them? So where would Charles then go that might be better than Ferrari? If Ferrari have a terrible car next year, obviously Mercedes would be better. Obviously Red Bull would be better. Obviously McLaren would be better. Red Bull might have an opportunity for him. Equally, Mercedes might as well. Yeah, but you're right. You know, it'd be lovely to see him in a proper team. I was going to say it's not quite correct, is it? I mean, Ferrari's a great team, but you know, what they need is a car at Ferrari. AB says, I sincerely believe you should be in the paddock and asking the right questions to the drivers so that the fans know more. Thank you very much. The standard of journalism and questions asked is very poor. Well, yeah, I don't tend to have the sound up. I'm lucky enough to be able to have the Track FX, just the ambient on. So I love listening to the engine noise, bit of the chat going on in the background and all the team radio. That's what I listen to. So I don't really, occasionally, if I see a driver's being interviewed, I kind of wait until he's talking and turn it up. And then to my astonishment, he's saying the same thing twice because interviewers managed to ask the same question twice. And he's saying, well, as I've already said. Yeah, as I say, for me, good interviewing is just chatting and getting the mood and the feel of the driver at that moment. And I have to say, you know, when I was doing live TV and, I don't know, Michael, whatever, the engine blows up 3 laps to the end of the race and he's coming back into the paddock area, the director's on your headset saying, go and talk to him. And I have to say at that moment, I thought, no, I don't want to capture this moment, because the moment is he's got his helmet on, he doesn't want to talk, and he's going through the paddock. And what's he got to say anyway? We know what he's going to say. And so I never liked doing that, he's coming back in now, he must be so angry, go and talk to him. That's ludicrous. But all the other stuff, whether it be chatting by the car park behind the paddock area, by their road cars, or as they're coming into the track in the morning or on the grid, yeah, I love doing that. And I'd love to do some more, but equally, you know, there's a new generation out there all doing their thing, so there you go. Lee Kambanga, I just saw a caption saying Peter believes Max would struggle to beat Piastri in the same car. Is that true? You have more experience than me, but I think that's a statement of the season for me. No, I didn't say that at all. I just said of all the drivers in the other car that would make Max think and get his attention, it would be Oscar Piastri. That's what I said. I was basically saying how good Oscar was and why Lando's looking, you know, pretty battle scarred alongside him. I was just saying how good he was. I said even Max, if Max had him alongside, would have to take him very seriously as another driver that he had to beat. He wouldn't be, in other words, just a number 2 rollover like Sergio Perez or Yuki Tsunoda or Liam Lawson or, you know, any of the others, Daniel Ricciardo even. That's what I said. So it's kind of been taken out of a misquote and taken out of context. So I think that's wrong. I think a straight fight, I've always said Max is a better driver and he's a short corner driver. Oscar isn't. He tends to go there some ways, but overall Max is, you know, another class. in terms of being a short corner driver. I'm not saying another class over Oscar Piastri. He's in another class of the way they drive. And because that, if you perfect short corner driving, extending the straight in, extending the straight out, with not worrying about your minimum speed, just getting the rotation perfect, as Max often, I'd say, does 99% of the time, you've got a much bigger footprint also to handle the variables. That is the way Max Verstappen drives, and that's the way Charles Leclerc drives. That's the way how he finished third at Spa. A lot of people saying how great he drove. Well, that's one of the reasons. He's a short corner driver with all that finesse that comes with it, and that massively large space that he can operate in, relatively speaking, compared with, say, a Carlos Sainz or a Liam Lawson, who's always on the edge, or a Yuki Tsunoda, because they're turning in a little bit later, and they're all to do with when they can get the power on, how late they can brake, when they can get the power on, and getting it on as soon as possible, and then touching the exit curb. With a Max or a Charles, it's all about manipulating the car down to the rotation point, having extended the straight. That's where they've got their advantage. Then they've just got to get the car rotated perfectly, and then they've got their straight line exit. It sounds very simple, but to do that requires unbelievable finesse and coordination, and that's what Max has, that's what Charles has, and that's what Lewis in his great days prior to Abu Dhabi 21 had, and which he's kind of getting back a little bit now. I'd say he's about 40% back to where he was at Abu Dhabi 21, but that's better than being 10% back, which is where he was last year. So yeah, Lee Kambanga, do you think some decisions being made by the FAA are to benefit certain teams or drivers at the moment? I really think the majority of the fans are not happy, especially with the wet race situation. Well, Lee, I think the field was probably split 50-50 in terms of those who wanted to race because they had a lot of downforce on the car, and those who didn't because they didn't have much downforce and were hoping that the track would dry. So the FAA would have known that, and they would have known what wing settings everybody had, but if they didn't, they should have from Parc Ferme. And so I don't think they're thinking, oh, let's really hurt Red Bull here and we'll really hold the race up. I think, as I said in my video after the race, I think it's just all massive conservatism over not wanting anything to go wrong again. And almost going back the other way now, much too conservative, because the fail-safe way to run the Belgian Grand Prix on Sunday was to wait until the sun came out and then put the race on, which the fans, I don't think, wanted. I certainly didn't want. I don't think you did either. We wanted a wet race. We all love wet Formula One races. It's what, to some extent, Formula One is all about. But I think after Abu Dhabi 21 and everything had happened and the whole new regime we have there now in race control, I think their policy is incredibly conservative. When in doubt, take the conservative decision, and that's what we're seeing at the moment. That's why I said what I said in the video afterwards. I'm not saying they should have started at that moment, but I think they could have started 20-25 minutes later, and I think whatever they did, it should have been a standing start as well. So it's like politics, it's like life, isn't it? That one horrendous thing happens and then everybody goes the other way, to the other extreme, and there's never a happy medium, never a happy medium. And it's always boom, boom, boom. And part of the problem is that we're not very good as human beings of anticipating problems before they happen, particularly in motor racing. We tend to let it happen and then we react, and generally we overreact. And that's what we saw at Spa, in my opinion. And as I said to Cam, Jackie Ickx, winner of that 68 French Grand Prix in his first year in Formula One, driving for Ferrari, wet race, disappears into the distance. One of the great wet wins of all time in Formula One. And he's the guy with the checkered flag at Spa on Sunday, thinking, I thought it was supposed to be a wet race. What's happened to these guys? Don't they race in the wet anymore? Lee Kambanga, and last point, he says, I see even with the broadcasting it favours certain drivers. I can tell you that even the new fans are now complaining about these things. Formula One is being manipulated by the people in charge. Yeah, well, I've been fairly critical. I'm probably the only person out there of the Vantage safety car and how wallowy that looked, leading in the very wet conditions, leading the cars around. And I said, for the look for Formula One should be something like a GT3 RS Porsche at the front there as a proper safety car. dun, 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 you know, and Bernd Mailander would have different reports on the track conditions if he was in a Porsche compared with that thing, which was rolling all over the place. And you know, I think that's an example of we've got to have Aston Martin because they're paying us a fortune to have that car there, and that's to me that's wrong, because what car you have as a safety car is really important in Formula One, very important, particularly in the wet. And we've gone down that road before, haven't we? And there's no reason why they shouldn't have a Porsche, because Porsche are part of the Formula One group. You know, we have the Super Cup races over the Grand Prix weekends. And the problem is, of course, Porsche don't want to give F1 a lot of money for the safety car. That's the difference. Porsche are very good at not wasting money. That's why they didn't do that engine for Red Bull a couple of years ago, because they never intended to do an engine unless it was fully paid for by somebody else. That's the way Porsche operate for customers, if you like. And Red Bull always assumed that if they got enough energy behind the whole thing, that Porsche would probably pay 50% of the money, or maybe even more. Porsche said, forget it, ain't going to do it. If you want to pay the full budget, we'll do it. And so that never happened. And it's a bit like that with the safety car, I'm sure. You know, I would imagine the discussions are held with Porsche, and they say, yeah, we can do a great car, be a really quick car, be perfect, we'll have all this, we'll have all that, and it'll cost X amount. And they say, well, on the contrary, we're going to ask you how much you wanted to pay us for the privilege of having the safety car, and then the whole thing would have just disappeared. So I think there's quite a lot of that. And you're saying broadcasting favours certain drivers. I can't speak to any of that because, as I say, I don't really listen to anything they're saying. And the only thing that really irritates me is about the broadcasting at the moment is that when you've got something like the Max Charles Leclerc battle going on, which isn't wheel to wheel, and it's not touching wheels, and they're not DRSing one another, they're just lining one another up, and obviously Max is pushing incredibly hard in Sector 2, and Charles really making sure he's got a great exit from La Source and going through Eau Rouge. You could do a lot with that battle on television. You could really bring that out with some great graphics to do with all the numbers that they can get from the cars, and you could really tell that story. But instead of focusing on that, they think, oh no, the gap's more than 2 seconds. Let's go to look, there's a gap between Ocon and Lawson. We'll go and focus on that, and for 14th place or something, because they think they've constantly got to show whenever there's a battle going on. And I think that's just, I don't know, juvenile, really, to be honest. I mean, it's not cerebral, is it? It's just going for the lowest common denominator, the lowest hanging fruit, instead of explaining to the world how brilliant that battle was between Charles and Max and how well Charles was driving. We didn't get to see that much of it because they only showed us that battle when Max happened to get a little bit nearer on occasion. So that's my main criticism, because they've got, like everybody now, they can see all the gaps, and as soon as they see somebody's in DRS range, they immediately cut to that. Oh, there might be an overtake. Yeah, it's all a bit banal, isn't it? Sarosh Soman. Hi Peter, on the philosophy of short corners to life, short corners are trying to be balanced as much as possible with all the four wheels flat. Pretty much what we need in life as well, to be balanced. Well, yeah, well said, and absolutely right. And when you do that, as I said, Max and Charles, when they're doing that really well, as we saw them on Sunday, Charles particularly, they are, because getting all four wheels flat to the road requires finesse and dedication and discipline. Once they're there in that lovely little square, that's when they can play with all these variables and react to them without losing any time. And that's the same as life, isn't it? If we're disciplined and we've got a square footing on life, we're more able to deal with all the things that suddenly come in from left or right, and we've got a center to our life, a core that can keep us, dare I say, on the path or on the straight and narrow. And it's when you're constantly reacting to all these things that are happening in life, and you're all over the place emotionally, that it's very difficult, because things are always going to be there to destabilize you. It's very difficult to keep any sort of direction. And it's a very good analogy, and I thank you for that. AB, Peter, we loved your interview with Lewis back in the day. It's such an insightful interview. I wish you could take more interviews of current drivers, at least Oscar, as he's a fellow Aussie, and helping him. Well, he doesn't need any help from me, that's for sure. He's got Mark Webber there, who's just as good a man as any you could have around his shoulder. And but yeah, no, I'm sure he's a great guy to talk to and to hang out with. And I just love his one-liners, really. You know, yeah, it's a bit busy up there. Is that what he said? Yeah, a bit busy through Eau Rouge. And, everything you need to say. He reminds me so much, actually, of Frank Gardner, who was the same, another Aussie, just one-liners, and said everything you need to say about the entire race weekend. He could sum it up in 3 words. And Oscar can do that. And so he's a great guy. And, yeah. No, I think, you know, because of Netflix, because of the way it is, because the teams have got all these media hubs of their own that they control, whether it be video, social media, I'd say the days of being able to actually talk to Grand Prix drivers in a proper conversation are over, really. I don't think you can do it in the way that I was lucky enough to be able to talk to, even to Michael, you know, but even before that, obviously, you know, drivers like Nicky or Mario, Ronnie Peterson, even Jim Clark. When I was I don't know how high, talking to Jimmy for 20 minutes at the airport in Sydney. Can you imagine today if, I don't know, if Max Verstappen was arriving at an airport at any given country where he'd been racing or leaving, and a kid was there in the airport, that Max would say, oh, come and have a coffee and come and have a drink or a Coke or whatever and sit down and chat to him for 20 minutes. He probably does actually know Max, but that's what Jim Clark did for me. And because he recognised me from the previous couple of years, I'd always been out there doing what I could. And so, yeah, I've been very lucky. And Lewis, I've always found to be a really cool guy to talk to. But we tend, as I said before, we tend to end up talking about things like Formula 3, Macau, karting, and, you know, maybe a few other things as well. But he's just a racer as well. I never talked to him about any of his other stuff. Don't know anything about it, really. Don't understand any of it. Aaron Lee, another regular. Hi, Aaron. Aside from sponsorship deals, is there any reason to have a safety car now that steering wheel displays can show the delta time drivers have to follow in SC, VSC conditions? In other words, couldn't both SC and VSC be virtual now? Would your drivers need the physical visual reference for the safety car? No, of course they don't. And they could be completely visual, and we don't even need the safety car apart from, what do we need the safety car for? I'm trying to think. Oh, lots of money from Aston Martin. Because the virtual safety car does everything, I think, doesn't it? Or I'm missing something here. And the reason we don't have the virtual safety car for everything is because F1, back in the Bernie days, thought, incorrectly in my view, that one of the reasons IndyCar was going quite well was because they had the pace car, and when the race was boring they could just bunch up the race and have another restart. That's when Nigel was doing it in 93 and 93, 94. And so that's why Bernie introduced what he then called a safety car, because he didn't want it to be called a pace car because it looked as if it would be copying America. And we've had it ever since, and I still think that is at the back of the TV directors' minds. And if the collective TV networks that spend a fortune on Formula One met with Liberty stroke the FIA about, and the subject was safety cars, do we want them? I think most of the TV companies would say, yeah, we want them, because if the race is boring, exactly what Bernie said, we bunch up the field. That's why we don't need them at all, because we can do everything virtually, as you say. And virtual safety car is a really good thing. And it's a much fairer thing because it keeps the gap you've earned. So, and you say, well, what about when they have to come down through the pit lane, for example? They need the safety car then. Well, do they? I mean, they're so used to the speed limit thing in the pit lane, and the whole thing can be controlled, as you say, virtually. Why wouldn't they do that? The only reason is, A, it's money. The safety car is the thing they can go out and sell, and they make a fortune, as I've been saying earlier, from it. And B, it is this very cheap way of bunching up the field and having a sprint to the finish. You know, if we'd had a virtual safety car at Abu Dhabi 21, guess who'd be world champion? So instead of the safety car. So I mean, so that's a good point. Am I missing something here? That if the lapped cars unlap themselves, could they do that if we're in a VSC rather than a safety car situation? Maybe not. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe not. My brain actually is not big enough to answer that, to think that through without having a bit more time to think about it. Maybe that's the only time that you would need a safety car. I need to ask somebody about that. Somebody with a time-keeping type brain. Sujith, hello Peter. Oscar's consistently reminded me of Charles's run to victory in Monza last year. Yet more evidence that Oscar is in never-ending quest of learning and developing, like Max, pure class. Yeah, well, you've said it. That was a brilliant drive, wasn't it? And it all happened in the first lap. Boom, straight past Lando. End of story. I wonder what Lando was. Oh, I know what Lando was thinking. What the hell's happened to my engine? That's what he did say on the radio. I said, "Where's the pack?" or whatever he said. So, I don't know. I think. Yeah, he's good. I mean, obviously, every time Lando wins, a lot of people think, oh, maybe Lando's going to win it after all. And every time Oscar wins a race, oh, maybe Oscar's going to be unbeatable now. So still quite a lot of races to go. Anything can happen. But, it was funny that one of the things with these interviewers, they always have to finish the interview by saying, so how do you think you're going to go in Hungary? And, I mean, to me, that's a banal question as well, because what's the driver going to say? He's never going to say, well, to be honest with you, I don't like the circuit, the car's rubbish, and I don't think we'll be quick at all. He's never going to say that, is he? So he's always going to say, oh, yeah, really looking forward to Hungary, hope we go well, got upgrades, blah, 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 whatever they're going to say. They always say it. But with Lando, when they got the subject onto Hungary, he said, oh, yeah, one of my favourite circuits, really love it there. I'm thinking, isn't that the place where he gave the win to Oscar Piastri? I can't imagine that he loves that place. Anyway, to each their own. That would be like, oh yeah, that was the restaurant where I had that horrendous, food poisoning. I don't want to go there again. Isn't that what you'd be thinking about Hungary now? Anyway, Sujith again. Not long ago you stated WEC, the World Endurance Championship, can't be judged because of the amateur drivers. I must say the amateur drivers are only in GT3. Only pro factory drivers are eligible for hypercar, gold, platinum. Yeah, no, you're right. I just don't like the way it's... I mean, we've got all these factory teams in there with these hypercars. Yeah, I give you all that, granted. But I don't like the speed differential of a factory hypercar coming up to lap a GT3 car driven by an amateur in the wet. I don't like that. I don't think that's motor racing. And that's the reason, one of the reasons Jim Clark didn't do Le Mans after 1961. And I think the speed differential, as those who know me well through this channel, is the thing I fear the most. Accidents on the straight, somebody doing something stupid on the straight, and another car hitting it and having a massive accident, because on the straight there's less runoff area, there's no runoff area usually, and the accident's at very high speed, and usually there's airborne elements as well. And so I just cringe at the thought of amateur drivers in GT3s on the same racetrack as hypercar drivers. That's what I mean by that. So, and that's what I don't like about it. Oscar Beckalou. Hi Peter. What is the secret to being great in the wet? What do drivers like Max, Fernando and Lewis do differently to the others? Also, what are the standout performances in history? Well, there are lots, aren't there? The secret, I mean, funnily enough, I had a really nice email from a gentleman yesterday who was at Alton Park in 1971 for the April Spring Formula One meeting. There weren't many cars there, but the race was won by Pedro Rodriguez in a BRM P160. It was a non-championship race, but he won it. Not many people remember that Formula One win for Pedro. And he then asked me, he said, he was actually watching at Lodge Corner, the right-hander that then leads with the downhill section afterwards. And he said, I was amazed at how wide Pedro's turn-in was at for that corner, how wide he was coming into it. It was dry. And he said, does that mean he wasn't a short corner driver? And I replied, well, my memory of Pedro was that he was not a short corner driver. He was definitely sort of Carlos Sainz-y, but maybe with a little bit more finesse even than Carlos Sainz. And I'll tell you why. Because the one thing that Pedro was absolutely brilliant at, like Sergio Perez, was power application and linear power application relative to the load that he had to put through the loaded rear coming out of a corner. He never overloaded the rears. He was really good on that. And that's why he was so good in the wet. And that is a very, very important part of the wet driver's vernacular, being incredibly good on power application. It's not the only thing. And Pedro was in an era when dare I say, bravery. I think we got to say it with the Rodriguez brothers, both Ricardo and Pedro. Fearless, wet weather driving, not worrying about going down the outside of Jackie X in a Ferrari around the outside of Paddock Bend in a 917 Porsche, knowing that he's got the car control to hold it. But more importantly, not blowing it then by getting on the power too abruptly and having one of these, which, in my opinion, is what Joe Siffert had more than Pedro. Joe Siffert was a little bit more spiky with his throttle application, whereas Pedro was much more svelte with the throttle. Brian Redmond too, another great racing driver, massively underrated, very good. So yeah, great wet weather races. I mean, there are so many that one can talk about. Everybody, I mean, as far as Jackie Stewart, 68 German Grand Prix, when he won that in the clouds and the mist and the rain by I don't know how much. But he also won the Dutch Grand Prix that year in the wet. That was another very good win for him. And the ring, he had his hand in a plaster cast because he'd broken his wrist in a Formula 2 race. The Dutch Grand Prix was slightly different, but interestingly in that race, Pedro Rodriguez was really good in the wet. Not many people noticed it, 68 Dutch Grand Prix. Pedro was also really good in the wet in the 68 Longford Tasman International race. Again, remembered for Piers Courage winning in the wet in a Formula 2 McLaren because he had quite thin Formula 2 Dunlop tyres on the car. But Pedro had wider Dunlops on the BRM. From memory, he was second in that race. He was really good. You know, Jim Clark had finished way down, as did Graham Hill. Fast ends were undrivable, but the Dunlops were wider on the BRM, but Pedro still made good use of them. John Surtees, 66 Belgian Grand Prix, classic wet weather win. It wasn't wet on the opening lap. 4 or 5 cars went off when the rain hit them at Blanchimont on the opening lap, but Surtees then won in the wet in the 66 Belgian Grand Prix. Jim Clark won twice in the wet at Spa, 63 and 65. 63, one of his greatest drives because the Lotus 25 was jumping out of top gear and he had to hold it, one hand on the gear lever going into the master kink and hold the steering wheel with one hand. But guess what? He had to change his position on the hand because as he went through the master kink, the back end slid out and he had to be ready with the opposite lock with one hand. So he had to have the hand in a position to be comfortably able to handle the opposite lock while he was holding it in gear at the same time. 65, it was so wet at the end that Jimmy slowed almost to a walking pace. The rain was hitting the road and then bouncing up sort of a foot, 12 inches. It was so bad. And Jimmy slowed right down, and he explained afterwards that he did that not because that was the safest way to finish the race, but because he was concerned about Jackie Stewart, the young Scottish rookie behind him in the BRM, who was kind of catching him a little bit, and Jimmy was, every time Jackie went a bit quicker, Jimmy went a bit quicker. And he started to get concerned for Jackie that he might have a shunt if he continued to be pushing it hard in the rain as it was. And so he backed right off, which was with no radio in those days, which Jackie got the message from and backed off right as well. And they both finished at walking pace. So that was a beautiful little move, wasn't it? Yeah, you know, everybody talks about Ayrton at Portugal and obviously at Donington as well. Portugal 85 for Ayrton, his first win in the Lotus Renault. But not many people talk about Nigel Mansell in that race. It was one of Nigel's best ever Grand Prix drives. He started from the pit lane after having a slight biff on the formation lap, and they managed to get the thing straightened out a little bit, and he started the race from the pit lane and finished 5th, and he was in traffic the whole way, passing cars all the time, in a car that had horrendous throttle lag, and the throttle was like an on-off switch, basically, enough to pitch Keke Rosberg into the guardrail in the sister car coming out of the last corner. Keke, as good as Keke's car control was, he ended up in the guardrail in that car. Nigel finished 5th in that car. Ayrton won it, beautiful win in the wet, but he did have a pretty clear track most of the way. So for me, that's 85 Portuguese Grand Prix is always, I always think of how well Nigel drove in that race in the wet. Keke Rosberg, speaking of Keke, 78 Daily Express International at Silverstone in the Ralt. Yeah, I think it was a Ralt, wasn't it? Theodore Racing. won the race. Unbelievable. I remember I was there and I was chatting to him afterwards, and he said, "Oh yeah, I was just looking at the tracks of the cars that have been around in front of me and just following those tracks. Now you could go a little bit quicker because they'd dispersed the water a little bit and won the race." Theodore it was, yeah. Amazing drive by Keke, showing his car control, which we all knew about then anyway from Super B, but that really put Keke on the map. Lewis has had several good races in the wet. Brazil, Fuji, Silverstone. Yeah, we know how good Lewis is in the wet. Rubens Barrichello, you know, you got to hand it to him for what he did at Silverstone as well, haven't you? In the Ferrari. Michael, yeah, absolutely superb. In the wet, whenever it was there, Michael was always good. Short corners, excellent. Max Verstappen too. Carlos Reutemann, very good in the wet. Never really got to see. Didn't see that many races in his career. But if you think about, Brazil '81, he could have won that race by 5 minutes, but he was not going quickly because there was a political situation with AJ behind him. But he was enough to be. He was, just doing enough just to keep it there, and he won the race. He disobeyed the team orders at the end, but his argument was, well, if you'd told me that I had to try and get a 7-second or a 12 or 15-second lead, I could have done it in 3 laps. And he was right. He could have. Many more. Olivia Panis. I've always liked to think that Carlos Sainz is a wet weather driver, a great wet weather driver. But let's get him in a great car in the wet and really let him do it. But there are many more, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of people offering their examples of great wet races as well. But one I should. And I don't want to forget this one, is Taffy Von Trips, 61, British Grand Prix, Aintree. Absolutely, there's no way they would have raced if that was today, the conditions of that race. There's no way, and it never eased up. And Von Trips won that race, disappeared in the Ferrari Sharknose, was absolutely brilliant. But guess who set fastest lap right at the end? Tony Brooks. Shouldn't forget him either in the wet, or Sterling Moss, of course. Tony Brooks set fastest lap in a BRM powered by, would you believe, a Coventry Climax engine. The BRM didn't always do their own engines. So yeah, Von Trips in the wet, as good as it gets really, isn't it? I'm sure Nuvolari was as good as anybody that we've ever seen in the wet as well. Anyway, better move on. We can talk about that all day. I haven't got that much more time either. So as I say, I'm going to try and do famous last words. I'm going to try and do a live stream again tomorrow morning. So if anybody can do that, time zone wise, and I haven't got to your question, please feel free. AB again, with Max possibly at Merck, possibly. I think he's going to stay at Red Bull, is he not? I think he is. And if it's Max and Russell, and what are your thoughts for the season and who tips and which circuit George can... Well, I mean, George is another guy that would obviously take Max's attention because, yeah, like Oscar Piastri, he's a serious racing driver and he's very, very quick. So, but I don't think that'll happen. I think he's going to stay at Red Bull from what I understand. So, I think Max would have it, but then George has got his knowledge of the team and familiarity with the car and everything else. So that's one reason probably why Max wouldn't go there, I would think. M.A. Khan, Peter, like you, Max was upset about the delay. Do you agree with Max that we are unlikely to see great wet weather races again? Is this Max the last of the great rain masters like Schumi, Mansell, Senna? Yeah, I do. As I said, I think going back to this imaginary discussion that should have taken place at Red Bull before they were deciding what wing to put on Max's car, Laurent Mekies should have been saying, look, if you guys want to put in so much wing to this car to the point where he's going to be ridiculously slow in a straight line if it's anything other than super wet, bear in mind that if it is super wet, the FIA probably won't run the race. Did that conversation happen? Obviously not. But that is the situation. I mean, it was the thin end of the wedge when they decided to hold it up for as long as they did, but then the wedge became much wider when they decided not to have the standing start either. And that to me was, that's a really bad sign. Really bad sign. I think the FIA now may say, well, these were conditions peculiar to Spa, different at other circuits, there's more standing water at Spa or more spray or whatever they might say to justify it. And if this was, I don't know, Abu Dhabi, they wouldn't. Actually, thinking about it, if it did rain that hard at Abu Dhabi, it'd probably be horrendous standing water as well, because they probably never built the circuit for rain anyway, rain drainage. So yeah, I do. I think it's the end of great wet weather racing. As I say, you've got Jackie Ickx there, who put in one of the greatest wet weather drives of all time, putting the checkered flag out to a dry Belgian Grand Prix. Odd. Hi Peter, this is Fuzzy22. Do you think the years of Red Bull becoming like Alpine are upon us? It seems the corporate structure has ruined the team and made everyone leave since the death of the head Red Bull guy, Dietrich Mateschitz. Yeah, we were talking about this. I was talking about this with Cameron on the chat show with him, that, you would imagine, given the enduring legacy of Dietrich Mateschitz, that the people in charge of the Red Bull budget now, Formula One budget or racing budget, and personnel would be doing everything they could to do it exactly the way that Dietrich Mateschitz would want it. That's how I imagined it would have been. But it doesn't seem to be that way. There seems to be people there who want to, it's a different era now. This is more important. That's more important. And I think Christian Horner's probably a victim of that. I imagine if Dietrich Mateschitz was still around, he'd probably still be in that job. I may be wrong, but I imagine he would be. And the Adrian Newey thing obviously was unfortunate. And without Adrian and without some of the other very good people they've had technically now, it's not going to be that easy for them. Although there seems to be a pretty good atmosphere there at the moment. Let's see. All we can say, to be honest, in answer to your question is, let's see what the car's like in 2026. It's all to do with the car. If they produce a car that's really good, actually quite dominant, then we can all say, Red Bull, geniuses, brilliant, back again. Laurent Mecchi, brilliant. We can say all of that. But until we know what that car's like, then not much more we can say, except that they don't have the building blocks that McLaren have now got to get to the 26 car, because their knowledge and their building block on which they currently stand isn't as effective as the McLaren one. And that's why one quick car usually engenders another. And Red Bull kind of lost the plot with, dare I say it, with Adrian leaving. So there you go. M.A. Khan, Peter, I'm amazed how you predict outcomes. You said Russell was a problem for Lewis, Oscar for Norris, and Lewis would struggle versus Leclerc. In 25, you said Max was a special talent. What's your secret? Well, it's very kind of you to say that, M.A. Khan. I'm not sure many people would agree with that, but it's very kind of you to say that. And all I can say is that from the minute I was flag marshalling at Warwick Farm and watching different drivers coming out of Creek Corner into the S's, I was fascinated at the different approaches to Creek Corner, the hairpin, and how they would exit and what they would do into the S's and how much road they were using. And for some reason, I seemed to be able to see all that quite clearly. And I would say to some of my buddies, it's amazing what Neil Allen's doing there compared with Frank Maddich or whatever. And they say, well, what are you talking about? But I always could. And when I first saw Jim Clark drive from that place, I just saw this Lotus 49 floating out of the corner as if it was just on a piece of string, but it was sliding, and Jimmy was correcting it, but you couldn't see the corrections. It was the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. And of course, what I was actually seeing was Jimmy's short corner. He's got the car rotated, and he was basically just driving to an exit point. And then I was very lucky to befriend Carlos Reutemann very early in his career, and we started to talk a lot about Jim Clark and what I'd seen, and he started to say to me, yeah, this is the way to drive. And we'd talk a lot about that. The phrase short corners, which was a Rob Wilson phrase, great phrase, was not used then, but in Carlos's way of speaking, he always used to say, I like to see the exit of the corner before I'm turning into the corner. That's how he would describe it, and that's exactly what he meant, short corner. And we used to do that, and Carlos used to send me out on the track when I was a journalist to watch other drivers, what they were doing, what their turn-in point was, how they were getting into the corner, what their steering wheel movements were like, corrections and so forth, where they were changing gear on exit. And I used to do a lot of that for Carlos. And I loved doing it, obviously. And then in the middle of all that, John Thornburn, who used to manage Trevor Taylor, who I got to know quite well because of his Jim Clark connection, rang me. He'd been working with Nigel in '77 when Nigel was racing Formula Ford. Said, Peter, you've got to go and look at Nigel Mansell. He's the best British driver I've seen since Jim Clark. I thought, wow, okay. So I went to see him at Thruxton early '78 in a Formula 3 March that he had rented for 5 races. Then the money ran out. He didn't do any more driving that year. And I watched him out the back at Thruxton. And well, you could never do that today. I actually went round to a marshal's post from memory. I drove around, chatted up the marshal's guy, and just stood behind the barrier there, watching Nigel, knowing it was the place to watch this guy. And I just couldn't believe, it was exactly what I'd been watching with Clark. He would be coming in slightly earlier, unbelievably well balanced and fluid in the way he was driving, no spikes at all, even though it's quite bumpy there. Just incredibly linear in everything he was doing. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. I'd never even met him at that point, so I went back to the paddock, shook hands with him, and we became friends, and I did all I then could to help him get a drive, get sponsorship, and then get him into Formula One. And luckily it all worked out. And I was team manager of the year. He won the title with Williams, so that was a great thing. A wonderful feeling, actually, to have been able to help Nigel and be a part of his career, and then we won a championship together. And then ever since then, I've always, as TV's got better and you get better views and angles, and now we've got more telemetry, it's fascinating to look at the way people drive and to see. You can actually, I don't need to, it sounds glib, but I don't actually need to hear them doing these set piece interviews to understand what their psychology is like and what they're actually like as racing drivers, because you can tell all of that from the body language in the cars and what they're doing on the racetrack. And so that's where we are. And I don't know if I have a talent that's any different from anybody else's, but I'm much more comfortable looking at what drivers are doing one from another than I am looking in the pit lane at whether somebody's got a barge board fence that's 2 centimeters higher than it was in the previous race. That doesn't really interest me at all, and I can't even see it anyway. To me, it's all just white noise. But when it comes to drivers and what they're doing, I just have these alarm bells and things going off all the time when I'm watching what's happening, and I'm thinking, wow, that's interesting. Oh, what's he doing? And then, like for example, after the race, I did the video, and I suddenly thought, you know what? I forgot to look at what Max was doing through turn 14 in qualifying compared with Oscar. We know what Lando did in turn 14, but what did he do compared with Oscar? How was Max taking turn 14 with that more downforce in the Red Bull? So I looked at, that to me, I suddenly thought, wow, that's going to be really fascinating. And it was. Guess what he was doing? Exactly what Lando was doing. He was floating the car in with no brakes or throttle for about the same time as Lando. Now, it's interesting. I'm going to have to end the live stream here, but I'm going to end it just with this one comment. I was actually talking to a current race engineer the other day about this, and he was saying, what do you mean, Peter, he wasn't on the brakes or the throttle? I said, well, I can see it on the telemetry, and actually you can see it on the car. It's just settling the car beautifully. He said, no, it's complete rubbish. There's no way any racing driver at the moment is either not on the throttle or not on the brakes. Sorry, is either on the throttle or on the brakes. No driver would ever be off both at any moment. And I said, well, okay, you're getting your telemetry GPS, we're getting it, whatever we're getting it from, I don't know, somewhere, but it's pretty accurate. It's absolutely perfect to the lap time. It's absolutely perfect to the position where they are on the corner. And that's what it looks like to me. So I'm going to stick with that. And to me, that's what was going on. Lando and Max had that feel. So when people say, oh, Peter, you're much too into Lando, he does something on those corners that's really nice. And it was no surprise to me that Oscar said, yeah, he went in too quickly into 14, because that's his way of going quicker. It's just to go in a little bit quicker. Whereas Lando's way is to go in a little bit quicker, but then just to come out of everything and let the car do the work. And that's very nice to see. And turn 14 is a good place to do that. And that's exactly what Max was doing. So it had to be right, in my opinion. So there we are. I'm going to do another live stream tomorrow morning. I've said it now. I'm not exactly sure of the time, probably 11 CET. So all those that we didn't get to, apologies. But please, if you can join us, do. And I might even try and do another one in the evening. I really enjoy doing this and chatting to everybody and getting your thoughts. So thank you very much for bearing with me at the beginning of this live stream, because it was a real mess. Well, from my end, it was a real mess. I don't know whether it actually was, because you probably just saw nothing, and then suddenly I appeared 20 minutes late or whatever. But I hope it wasn't too bad. But thanks for indulging me, and thanks for watching. Big thanks to Jetcraft, to OEM Exclusive, to TrackNinja, and to REC Watches, our partners on this channel who make this channel what it is. Great to have them on board. And if you haven't looked at the description below the videos to see what they do and how they work, and definitely to see if you can order one of the great REC watches with a discount, please do so below this video. And with that note, take care, have a good day, have a good evening if that's where you are, and see you tomorrow.